For the first time in what seems like forever, we have 13 games on this week's main daily fantasy football slate. And as a result, I think we've got good plays at each position in most salary tiers, ? And it's kind of enticing. I feel like this is one of the more fun slates we've had in a bit. Might not be the best games, may not be the highest totals, but I'm pretty jazzed about this week. We're going to break down which guys we are jazzed about, break down our priorities among the studs, where we're seeing value, and much more to get you set for week 17 over on FanDuel.com. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brendan Gadula. He is the senior managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, week 17 coming in hot. And I think that, like I said, pretty fun plays across the board. How you doing today?
I'm good. And I'm better because of your optimism. You basically said, like, we got plays at all different salaries. If the games are bad, some other negative things. But overall, you were able to spin it as a positive. So that makes me feel a lot better. So thank you.
Are you disagreeing with the sentiment that this is a fun slate?
I think it's a good slate.
Okay. Then I feel better. Because I sometimes my worry when I feel good about a slate is that I'm overconfident in the value plays, because that can happen. It has happened with me in the past for sure. And I could see that being true this week too. I could see myself being a bit too high on some of these guys, but the fact that you also think it's an okay slate, it says to me that it's not just me being overconfident in these guys. They might actually be legitimately decent plays.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to, this slate's always start with quarterback to a degree. Yeah. Like, if you don't have surefire, high ceiling guys at quarterback, it's a very different setup. This week we have a few names that, could do big things, but maybe not as many. And usually we are, allocating a lot of salary to quarterback. If we're going to go away from that and we have values, that can be a little bit scary, because then I will sort of double deprioritize the studs at certain positions. So, it's just a little bit different. I think it's not really a heat check slate as 2022 heat check slates fall.
It's more of like a 2019-ish, maybe, before rushing quarterbacks became as prevalent as they were, because we don't have a whole lot in that regard for this week, which means we can use guys in good game environments who may not be blazing it. Jared Goff, not a blazer, but I think probably a guy we both don't mind for this week. Yes, trailblazer in my heart. But we're going to break that down, Goff, break down why we think he's an option, break down that game, because it's, I think, the best game on the slate by a pretty decent margin, and get you set for week 17 in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Not only will we have a show next week on Thursday to preview week 18, we will also be here throughout the postseason, right here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and live on the FanDuel YouTube page. Go search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the FanDuel YouTube page as well. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review. Looking to get more out of the NFL this season? Well, now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's free bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to touchdown scores to over-under yards. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in free bets when you join FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. Refund issued is non-withdrawable free bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WIN-IT In Kansas and Wyoming, 1-800-522-4700. And in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. In Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. And in West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Let's dig into the slate overview here for week number 17. And Brandon, to me, I think the standout theme of this slate is that I actually have somewhat reliable value plays, I think at least, at running back, receiver, and tight end. And that allows me to take a very top-heavy approach where I can jam in Christian McCaffrey and Justin Jefferson in the same lineup, and buddy, do I want to. So to me, the key for this slate is I'm going to be a bit more top-heavy, a bit more stars and scrubsy than I have been of late. What is your overall overview over of this slate?
Well, overall, Jim, if I'm speaking in terms of overallness.
While wearing overalls?
No.
Okay.
Too far.
Yeah.
I think I'm sticking on like that quarterback conversation where, we have, I think at least specifically with Justin Fields and Mahomes in like a tough on paper matchup, two guys who can still break the slate open. And as much as we love Jared Goff, he has the ability, if everything falls the right way, to match one of those games once you account for salary. But a lot of this comes down to how confident I am in going with a value quarterback, because there are some names on the list that have not been on the list for a while. Someone like an Aaron Rodgers, even potentially.
Who has not scored 20 FanDuel points yet this year.
Right. So like if you're playing as someone like an Aaron Rodgers who's gonna rate out generally well on like a projections model from like a point per dollar standpoint, if you're gonna do that, you're still betting against at least two guys who can put up 30 pretty easily. So I think a lot of it comes down to how I'm starting my lineups with quarterback and how heavily like let's say I'm even building 10 lineups. How many of those are Mahomes and Fields? And if I got like 7 or 8 of them, does it even make sense to differentiate and get like sprinkles of guys? Probably does, but that's just not usually how I play. So I think I'm really stuck on like Mahomes and Fields versus the field.
Yeah, and those two guys are capable, like you said, of 30 to 40 points. And that's unique for this slate because not a lot of guys here can do that. The difference is we're betting against 2 guys this week as opposed to betting against 5 because there's no Josh Allen, no Joe Burrow. I don't know. I mean, Dak at times can be in that discussion. He was really good last week. Herbert can be in that discussion. So we have a lot of these like slate breakers off the slate, which means we have more flexibility to use guys who might not typically have a ceiling. So Trevor Lawrence, not a huge he but if he's good to go this week, he could be in that discussion. If you want to talk yourself into Kirk Cousins, you could potentially do that as well. Goff is in that discussion. And that's a different setup than we typically have at quarterback where we're just trying to jam in guys who can pound you for 30. You might not need 30 this week, which is a big deviation from the typical setup.
Yeah. And if I would say probably this is week 17 for 12, 13 of the 16 weeks so far, I've been trying to allocate at least 8,000 or more to quarterback.
Correct.
And 8,000 to 76 is a small thing, but 9,000 to like 74, 73, something like that, that's very different. And that's going to be just a different setup than I'm used to. So I think that's for sure my slate, my overall slate overview.
So maybe you can use the value plays we'll discuss at running back and wide receiver to get to Fields and Mahomes, to get those slate breakers in your lineup. Maybe that's where we wind up settling in for this week. Let's dig into the injuries, though. And part of the reason why we don't have a lot of high upside rushing quarterbacks here is because it seems like Jalen Hurts is likely to sit for a second consecutive game, which means Gardner Minshew will start. He's going to be starting, though, without Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson he has a core injury. He's going to sit out the rest of the regular season. A.J. Brown limited Wednesday with a knee injury. Miles Sanders didn't practice because of a knee injury. We'll talk about the Eagles in the trends section. Yes, I thought I changed that, but I didn't. We still got that there. In that same game, Chris Olave returned to a limited session following his hamstring injury. Without him last week, the Saints played a rotation at wide receiver, but that was also in massive, massive wins. They've been prioritizing guys who can block at wide receiver there. I don't think Keith Kirkwood, is getting snaps over Rashid Shaheed in a normal setup, but any interest in the Saints offense against the Eagles this week, because the Saints actually, I think, have a shot at the playoffs, so I could be wrong on
that. I'd probably get there and stack. I think we're going to have to answer that question of, are we taking imperfect stacks this week, or are we trying to find the best singular value plays? Usually for us, we're forcing in stacks as best we can. I don't know how much I'm going to stack up this game. Yeah. So I guess it depends on how we feel about the other side. And I guess maybe we can revisit this once you give us a trend.
Yeah, I think that there are some guys who could be somewhat interesting in the Saints, but there's no one I'm dying to use. Olave's been lower upside for a while now, which is disappointing. Yeah. Rashid Shaheed I've used at times, but hasn't had more than 5 targets in a game yet. 56 isn't bad for a guy who can burn. So I don't hate that, but the Saints do have a 3% shot at the playoffs still. So they could still make it. Yeah. They could still win the NFC South, I believe, which is nuts. But yeah, so there are considerations there, but as mentioned, we have 13 games. I'm not sure if that one is going to wind up being a big needle mover for me. Teddy Bridgewater, likely to start for the Dolphins this week with Tua Tagovailoa back in concussion protocol. They're facing the Patriots defense. Very tough opponent there. So with Teddy starting, are you out on Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and the running backs here for the Dolphins?
I don't love the situation. I also don't love the salaries specifically for the receivers. I know I'm smart enough to know that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle can still flamethrower any situation that they're in just because of how good they are. But when we're talking about priority plays, not necessarily seeing how Tyreek and Waddle are the true priority plays at receiver this week. And yeah, there's 13 games. Yeah, a lot of them are still imperfect, and we're going to have to kind of do some stuff that doesn't make us feel great. But you couldn't really pay me to stack the Patriots on the other side. So I think that also is going to factor in, or I'm just going to be lower on this situation as a whole.
Would you consider Jeffrey Wilson or Jeff? I don't know, whatever it goes by.
Jeff Wilson Jr.
Yeah, sorry. But shouldn't it be Jeffrey? If you have the junior in there, shouldn't it be Jeff? Anyway.
Yeah, can you do that? Can you
I think you can do whatever you want, but I actually don't know how it works. But his salary is $6,000. A 60% snap rate last week, but just 9 carries and 2 targets. I think given it's a backup quarterback, it's a very tough defense. I don't want to chase a bad situation for a low salary. So that's why I'm probably not there, but did want to at least ask you about him.
Yeah, I mean, he had 100% of the red zone carries, but it was just 2 last week. I don't know how many red zone plays they'll run in this spot. It feels like every Patriots game.
My model is a total for this game at 36, and it's at 41.5. So I like the under despite it being low.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just feels like every Patriots game in perpetuity is.
Unless they score a defensive touchdown. Even then, it might go under. But
so I just, and for you, no Tyreek, no Waddle.
I can't. Not on a 13-game slate. I'm good. The Raiders benching Derek Carr for Jarrett Stidham this week. They're facing the 49ers. So facing the 49ers defense, backup quarterback, high salaries. Can we just say no to Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs this week?
I can say no to Devontae easily.
You should say no to Josh Jacobs too.
I'm not going to say yes.
You should? Okay.
I'm not going to say yes to Josh Jacobs, but it does feel like one of those situations where there's not a whole lot of justification to play Josh Jacobs unless you say they're going to lean on him.
Yeah.
I know I've done this twice. I guess for people, I shouldn't have drawn attention to it, but they're going to lean on Josh Jacobs and therefore he's a good play, but I think he's not a good play because of the offensive expectations. So I'm out, but it does feel like he's going to put up 28.
There was also some wording this week. They were saying they want to give the young guys some looks, and that was regarding Derek Carr, Jarrett Stidham, but Josh Jacobs is a free agent. They probably want to get a look at Zamir White at some point. I'm not saying they're going to bench Josh Jacobs, but I wouldn't be shocked if his snap rate scales back to 60% to get a read on Zamir White there. So I'm out on both those guys. Mike White going to start for the Jets this week after getting his rib injury cleared. They're facing Seattle. It's a must-win game for the Jets. How does having White start alter your view of the Jets in this game?
once again, it comes down to how much I want to stack the other side. Like, I'm really trying to find the games that I can talk myself into both sides of. Sounds like maybe we'll get Tyler Lockett. He's able to like catch the ball without pain.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get Lockett at 6,000, I'm much more open to trying to force in some Jets. Garrett Wilson, 73. We know like at the peak, his workload can be well worth that. So I think like that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't see a whole lot of other ways that I'm going to get exposure here. So who in this game is playable outside of Garrett Wilson, Kenneth Walker, potentially at a lower salary, Metcalf, and then maybe Lockett?
Well, I think that's a lot of guys, honestly.
Yeah, it is, but there's only one Jet in that.
Right. But that one Jet's pretty good. I also think that we've been lower on Wilson for a while now. I think with his salary back down to 73 and with further confirmation that his role is sick, I'm really receptive to him at 73. The one issue I have is I'm not sure how often I'll be in this range because I want to get to Jefferson. If I use Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey, I will not be in this range. Right. I need to be at like the DJ Chark level, the Romeo Dobbs level, Jelani Woods level versus living here. So it kind of does come at the expense of Jefferson, but I'm not going to have Jefferson every lineup. So in the lineups where I don't have him, I think Wilson grades out really well. I do like Kenneth Walker III at 67 because even with the injury last week, he still had 100 plus yards in scrimmage. He played well. I know he didn't look healthy, but he played well still. So I think that he's interesting. You mentioned Lockett. He was at the Seahawks walkthrough yesterday, catching footballs and doing stuff. Official listeners did not practice, but I think it's encouraging that he was doing that. The Seahawks are also the team I would say most willing to use guys without practice. They are very open to that, which makes sense. I mean, they've got a lot of guys bagged up. But Lockett's salary got bumped down to 6,000, I think because they were expecting him to sit. We don't want to use receivers against the Jets typically, but 6,000 for a guy with his workload and his talent is intriguing. Kenneth Walker and Noah Fant also didn't practice on Wednesday. They played through their injuries last week, so I expect they'll be good to go. But if Lockett gets cleared with that salary being where it is, are you in this week?
Yeah, he's a love for me at 6,000, assuming he plays.
Matchups can only do so much, like you can downgrade guys for matchups, but don't cross them off. And I think that in order to not like Lockett at 6,000, you'd have to be like a cross off, and I can't get there.
Yeah, and like just contextualize what a 6,000 receiver is on FanDuel generally.
Right.
Tyler Lockett, not 100% in a bad matchup, still better than a lot of those options. So
right.
I like that. Also, Garrett Wilson in games with Mike White, 112 yards per game, 122 air yards per game, 24% target share, 6.3 downfield targets per game, which is
he had 6 in one of them. I know. Because I have 16 plus air yards on the downfield. He had 6 of those in one of the games. The games since Elijah Moore's role scale back up and Corey Davis has been active, Wilson has a 28% target share, 42% of the deep targets, and 28% inside the red zone. That is a really sick workload for 73. So I can kind of view him as like a consolation prize for if I can't get to Jefferson kind of. I know it's a huge salary difference, but like if I want to jam in McCaffrey and Saquon, maybe I can get back to Wilson. But I think he's really enticing. I think Lockett's very enticing. I do like Kenneth Walker III. Probably not going to DK because that salary is high enough where it's like a little bit more of a question, but I think this game is intriguing for sure. To say the least. Lamar Jackson missed another practice Wednesday with his knee injury. Seems like he's probably going to sit again against the Steelers. They're starting Tyler Huntley. I should also mention that this game is on the main slate despite being Sunday night because the slate was published before they flexed that game to Sunday night. So Rams, Chargers not on the main slate, whereas Steelers, Ravens is. So want to make that clear while we're talking about this game. I'm assuming we can cross off the Ravens if Huntley plays again. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, no receivers above 6,000. Mark Andrews down to 63. I'm not playing J.K. Dobbins. The upside's just too low with that against that Steelers defense.
Yeah, I think the pitch for Dobbins would have been if his workload were expanding, but it's not. Yeah. So I think that you can cross them off pretty comfortably. And that one, I do like the Steelers defense, though, on the other side of that game. Colt McCoy has cleared concussion protocol. He will start for the Cardinals this week against the Falcons. It's a road game, but it's indoors against a pretty bad defense. So how does McCoy starting alter your view of James Conner, DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown, and the rest?
I kind of like, I don't know, we'll probably talk about James Conner like here and there throughout the show as he fits in within the larger context of the running back slate. But 97% snap rate last week. This team's not afraid to lean on him. Very clearly, they getting rid of running backs, and we're like, it's clear that they like James Conner well enough. His yardage upside is one thing that has always sort of been a hindrance for us, and now it's not quite as much of an issue. 120 yards last week. I think he's a good play. I don't know if he is a better play at salary than like Travis Etienne for 300 less against the Texans, but it's almost like a why not both. And the reason that it's why not both is because of Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I'm a little bit lower on Connor because the salary is high. If he were still low 7,000s, it'd be intriguing. But I, like you said, I like ETN more, despite how often he has scorned us. I like Brian Robinson more at a lower salary. I like Isaiah. Should I admit publicly I like Isaiah Pacheco again? Yeah, sure. Let's do it. I like him again. So it's harder for me to prioritize James Conner at 8,000 when I have alternatives lower. It's not an anti-James Conner thing. It's like you said, the workload is awesome. Productivity's been there, which is not the case previously, but backup quarterback, that kind of thing, all working against him. Now, I don't think this game is bad. I could consider a DeAndre Hopkins, Drake London stack. I do like London, but it's just hard to see. I mean, Colt McCoy is fine, but it's hard to see us getting burned for not using Cardinals, despite the matchup with McCoy being starter for that one. Greg Dulcich mispracticed Wednesday with a hamstring injury, and he seems legitimately questionable to miss this game. We'll talk about the Broncos versus Chiefs in the bookmaker section. The Commanders will start Carson Wentz over Taylor Heineke this week. Antonio Gibson mispracticed Wednesday due to a foot and knee injuries, and sounds like he could wind up sitting. We'll talk about the Commanders in the trend section. Christian Watson mispracticed Wednesday due to the hip injury he suffered in Week 16. He's day-to-day right now, so could still wind up playing, but we'll talk about them in the bookmakers section. Damian Harris got in another limited session on Wednesday. There was reportedly a shot he'd be active as an emergency-only guy last week, which means I bet he's probably going to play this week. Now, that would, you think, shove Ramondre Stevenson out of play, but Stevenson's salary is just $7,000. That's pretty low. Where would you be on Ramondre if Harris does return, given Ramondre's forgiving salary?
Yeah, he was also limited in practice. Ramondre, that is.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah. It's very intriguing. It'd be a lot more intriguing if we had like Tua in this game overall. We could just load up on. I would have. Oh boy, this could be one of those like did I really do that situations. But I think I'd probably go with Brian Robinson over Ramondre at salary if Harris is back and there's no Gibson. So I don't dislike Ramondre. It just feels like really like we were itching to play Ramondre, and now the salary's down. But it's a different situation for both of them. So I think I'd lean Robinson there. And I don't necessarily think that I'll be rostering two of those guys in a lineup because I want a lot of McCaffrey, and I'm probably going to get like Connor and ETN as well. So
sure.
What are your thoughts here?
I feel like Ramondre is probably a play I should be higher on than I am. You know those plays where you're like, I should probably be higher on this guy. He makes a lot of sense, but I can't. It's hard to get too jazzed. It's probably point chasing or like whatever. What's the opposite of point chasing? Box score scouting? I don't know, whatever. I feel like I'm lower on him because he's had down games, but I should probably be higher. But the reason why I struggle to get higher is because he's not as healthy as he was at the beginning of the year. He's had those injuries, like you said. He's limited in practice, even though I did brush it off. Limited in practice, not as fully healthy right now. Harris had a lot of rest, probably going to be good to go. The offense, not good. I like the under in this game.
It's also one of those spots where, like, with this team in particular, they might have just been waiting for Harris to come back to like retaliate for Stevenson in that Raiders game.
I blame Jacoby more for that, but that's different.
Sure.
Yeah.
But
no,
like,
fair. Yeah.
I don't think they're silly enough to like bench Ramondre for Pierre Strong outright, but maybe.
I don't think Bill Belichick would. I would not be shocked if Matt Patricia would. But yeah, I feel like I should be higher on him, but it's just tough. He still gets a lot of passes. Like, even if you look at the split after Harris returned following his first injury, even those games, 12.7 carries for Ramondre per game, 8 targets per game, 112.3 yards per game. Still had a very good role, but he'd lose work, and that's tough.
Would you consider like a Jeff Wilson Ramondre stack, or do you not want to tie 2 running backs to this game?
I don't think I want to tie 2 players to this game more so than 2 running backs. And like, I'm not super high on Wilson, so I should be higher on Ramondre than I am, but I'm probably not going to be super high this week. Unless, I mean, if Harris sat again, Ramondre would be a great value at 7,000, honestly. So if Harris somehow can't play, I would say fire up Ramondre at that point. Mecole Hardman has finally been cleared, and he will return for the Chiefs this week. It's the first time they've had everybody healthy in like a decade, it seems like. We'll talk about the Chiefs in the bookmakers section. Kylen Granson mispracticed Wednesday with an ankle injury. He sat out last week, and Jelani Woods played 64% of the snaps. In the 2 games that Granson has missed, Woods has a 23% target share. So we typically don't want to tie our tight ends or anyone to Nick Foles-led bad offenses, but would you consider Woods at 47 if Granson sits?
Do you have to?
What
is the question?
What do you mean, do you have to?
Like, do you have to save that much salary this week at tight end?
So you probably don't have to. However, I think it's a different discussion because typically when you're spending down to 47 at tight end, you're doing so to save salary. And you're using a guy whose best case scenario is 40 yards and a touchdown. Woods' best case scenario is like 90 yards and a touchdown. I think he actually has upside. I think that's why it's a different discussion for him.
Yeah, that's true. Plus, like, if we go down from the top at tight end, like Kelsey against the Broncos, 83, Kittle just scoring like crazy, 74, Hawkinson flamethrowing everyone last week, 7,000. I love Taysom Hill, 68. Probably not going to play a whole lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mark Andrews, 63. So like, there's probably not a whole lot of tangible upside at tight end. So I think that does make Woods playable. Would you play Woods in your like primary best lineup you can build? Do you think he's like on that level?
If Granson sits, I can almost guarantee you he'll be in that lineup.
Okay.
Almost guaranteed. The only changer would be like if I wound up going Fields with like Komet. Like that'd be the only thing that would shift it, I think.
I think it's like a Komet versus Woods conversation there then.
Yeah, I agree. That's the only thing that would change it for me is if I wanted to get Komet with like a Komet Chark and just load up on studs, which I could do. But I might almost rather run Fields by himself than pass up Woods, honestly, which is, it might be dumb. But I think the fact that he can be a needle mover at a low salary, which is very, very rare at tight end, is intriguing to me.
I think Komet has... He's got some 70-yard games. He's got some touchdown upside in this situation.
Correct. And that's why I include in that discussion too, because he's similar in that regard. But both those guys I think are standout plays. Yeah. If Granson sits. Okay, let's talk about that Bears-Lions game and shift into the bookmaker section for this week. Highest total on the slate by a wide margin is that game in Detroit for the Lions and the Bears. 52.5 point total. The Lions are favored by 5.5. The Lions can still make the playoffs. The Bears might be trying to get Justin Fields, the quarterback rushing yardage record. So a lot of times in the bookmaker section, including games we'll talk about later on, we might be hesitant for whatever reason. I'm having troubles being hesitant with this one. Don't see a lot of flaws. What about you?
Yeah, not a lot of flaws. If I had to nitpick something, it's just the Bears' viability outside of like Justin Fields.
Yeah.
Like we have Cole Kmet, and that's all I feel great about.
Yeah.
But Justin Fields by himself, I'm willing to play. I have Detroit 31st in rushing yards over expectation per carry allowed to quarterbacks from the next gen stats model, 30th in rushing success rate and 32nd in rushing EPA per carry allowed to quarterbacks. Seems like a good situation for Fields. I also like Jared Goff at a savings of 1,000 there. Talk more about him later on, but in a really good situation at home, he's played well at home, played well against defenses that are not particularly great. Love me some. Look, we don't need to talk too much about how much we love DJ Chark, but we also are an Amon-Ra St. Brown podcast.
Of course.
I think like there's enough here to be able to stack it. It's a 2 quarterback game, but it's also not like, as much as I love the Jaguars, they have like 4 pass catchers or like 3 pass catchers. Here it's like narrower, and I like that.
Yeah. I always mess up this word. Jared Goff is the biggest beneficiary, correct? Not benefactor, beneficiary of?
Yeah.
Thank you. This is why Brandon is the senior managing editor of numberFire.com, and I am merely not. But with Goff, I think he's the one guy who benefits most from the construct of this slate where you don't need a 30 burger to be viable. Goff comes in at $7,400. He has been lighting it up in terms of yardage, and he has shown like enough upside to feel like he can hang with Mahomes and Fields, even if they don't like have a bad game. So I do like Goff a lot in that regard. $7,400. If you use him, it is very easy to get to a McCaffrey Jefferson lineup, which I would like to do for this week because I like both those guys a lot. So I think Goff is very in play. DJ Chark is, I know this is not a shock to anybody listening if you've been listening for the past month. DJ Chark is among the best plays on the slate at wide receiver. He is salaried $6,000, 90 plus yards in 3 of the past 4 games. His overall target share is not good, but Goff has just been amazing targeting Chark this year. Now playing indoors against a super banged up defense that checks a lot of boxes. Amon-Ra St. Brown's salaries come down to 82. I think that's great. I think that is very forgiving. Now, the one thing I will mention is DeAndre Swift's salary got jacked up. I think because of this game, it's 71. That's a little high. Probably won't get there. And I'm also not chasing Shane Zylstra, despite the Minnesota connection. I can't quite get there for a native Minnesotan. I know. So not going to the Lions running backs. I'm not going to Zylstra, but I do think that Kmet's great. Fields is great. No Montgomery or Herbert for me personally, but I think everything else kind of just wheels up.
Yeah. Montgomery at 75, I think is just a bit much.
If Herbert weren't there, I could do it.
Yeah.
But
for sure. Yeah. But Herbert played enough to cut in to that workload. Now, we could see a situation where like they do what the Panthers just did to the Lions, and like, but I think that would be Fields and then split between the running backs, not necessarily just the 2 running backs. So
yeah, I
think I'm lower on Montgomery. And then the reason probably that Jim even like mentioned DeAndre Swift, who has not been relevant for a while, is did play 56% of the snaps, 52% of the routes last week, but just 14 adjusted opportunities, 4 carries, 5 targets. Not enough there for me to want to get to even in stacks. And this is coming from someone who loves DeAndre Swift.
Yeah. So no Swift for either of us, but that's okay. You can make a Goff, Kmet, Chark. If you use Goff, Kmet, Chark, you can use McCaffrey and Jefferson and not use anyone lower than 61 or 6,000 at the other spots. Or sorry, 61 because I already included Chark in there. So it's a really fun lineup, really fun build. Yeah. You asked before if Jelani Woods would be in my like 1 lineup. I think that Goff is like 33% chance to be in that lineup for me, with the other 67% mostly being Fields.
Yeah, so like I think from that standpoint, like I'm gonna probably just have Kmet as like my main guy, whether it's with Goff or Fields, because the salary for Kmet's low enough to bake in the downside of being in a run heavy offense.
Will you chase any of the other Bears pass catchers? Velus Jones is a downfield target in back-to-back games, been getting a little bit more ramped up. We saw Byron Pringle pop up he had the touchdown, I guess. I don't know if you can't say he had a good game. Dante Pettis has 9 targets the past 2 games. Are you going to any of those guys or just sticking to Kmet?
I think I'm sticking to Kmet. I don't know if the upside for any of these guys, can they get you like 85 and a touchdown? Maybe if they get like a 40-yard touchdown, sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not really playing guys based on that. So
yeah,
I'm out. And again, it's a question of, do I need that savings this week? I don't think I need that much if I'm open to playing Jared Goff at quarterback.
Yeah, I think Velus Jones is the one I'd be most likely to consider that group, but probably will not be going there. Okay, let's move on to the Vikings and the Packers. Packers are 3-point favorites here. Total is 48.5. That opened at 46.5. It has risen. I'm a dummy. Weather in Green Bay does look pretty good with the winds at just 4 miles per hour. So it's a good game for stacking based on what the bookmakers are saying here. But like I said, I'm a dummy and I bet the under in this game. A lot of pieces in this game outside of Jefferson are pretty scary. How do you feel about Packers versus Vikings?
Scary as in scary to roster or scary to fade?
Question marks in their median expectation with questionable ceilings. So scary to roster.
Okay. I would agree with that. This is a very different situation. This NFC North matchup is not as good as the other one. Like there's Jefferson.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about like in real football, and I was like, what? But sorry, yeah, you're good. You're right.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't care about real football.
Never watched the game in my life.
Oh, you can watch these?
Yeah, they're available. What? It's crazy.
I think Jefferson is a true priority play this week. He's so good. His workload's so good. This is basically similar to like a Cooper Kupp situation from a year ago where he's got 16, 16, 15, 11, 11 targets over his past 5. We know he's got yardage upside. He's got touchdown upside. I don't think he scored twice in the first game of the year against Green Bay, coincidentally, but that's his only multi-touchdown game. Like he has games of like 150 yards and just a single touchdown. If he gets a second one, like
he has 1, 2, 3 games where he has had 24 FanDuel points with no touchdowns. How is that possible?
That's awesome.
How is that possible? That's Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's I think like the Cooper Kupp from last year comp fits because like Kupp became viable with how much volume he got, and Justin Jefferson's very good at football, and I think that needs to be factored in. But outside of that, like I think my main question to you is, and I'll pause because Jim's taking a sip from what looks like a very nice sturdy mug.
No free ads, but Home Federal Bank. It's here in Casson, Minnesota.
How many quarterbacks is this game?
0 for me. Cousins is like 1/4 of a quarterback.
Okay.
I can't use Rodgers, but I know, like you said, he probably does project well, and that's fine. I can't push back on that, but his best case scenario is they fall behind and have to play catch up, but I don't want to use quarterbacks whose best case scenario is that they fall behind.
So then who in this game are you eager to roster outside of Jefferson?
Dalvin. Dalvin Cook at 83. If he winds up being an overlooked piece in this game, I could be very interested. And I also don't mind, even if it's a lot of salary, I don't mind having Dalvin in the same lineup as Jefferson because both those guys could go off in the same game. If
you think that's an option, don't you have to be more open to like the quarterbacks? Unless you think this is just like a 45-3 route.
No, I mean, I probably should be accepted to Cousins, but that's why he's a 0.25 and not a 0.
Okay.
To me.
Dalvin, James Conner, or ETN at salary. How do you rank them?
Dalvin 1, ETN 2, Conner 3. What about you?
I'm probably going ETN, Dalvin, Conner. That's probably stupid to have ETN there, but I'll talk about this matchup for ETN in a bit.
Yeah, I do like Dalvin a lot. I will say too, if Christian Watson can't go, I would feel pretty okay about Romeo Doubs at 59. What? Why? Tell me why.
It's like Aaron Rodgers can't stand Romeo Doubs, it seems like.
I know he can't, but he might have to because they need a win to make the playoffs. In the second half last week, when Watson was ruled out, Dobbs had 3 targets. Lazard led with 5. It was 3 out of 16, so like 18% target share. But he played 85% of the second half snaps. So I don't think he'll have a choice. We've talked about the Vikings and how high of an ADOT they allow as a defense. Dobbs would be the primary beneficiary of that. God, I always get just messed up on that. Beneficiary of that.
Of a high ADOT?
Dobbs?
Why do you hate Allen Lazard's like downfield potential?
Because he shouldn't get down. He does get downfield work, but he shouldn't.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Jim. Just like a lot of people want to say and like predict what.
Okay, but when has he come through on that? That's the issue. He has not had more than 100 yards since October 9th, whatever week that was.
That doesn't mean
he's topped 85 once since then. But should he? The question is, will he convert on it? Because
should Dobbs?
If he doesn't, I don't know, maybe not either. But like, I think he is better built to handle downfield work than Lazard is. Like Lazard had 3 downfield targets last week and had 60 yards.
I just want to make sure that we're not glossing over the fact that Allen Lazard does have a high ADOT and gets downfield work. But that's all. I just want to make that known.
So, do you prefer Lazard at 62 or Dobbs at 59?
I probably prefer Lazard because I feel safer that he will get as many targets as he can handle, and Dobbs will be an not a true afterthought. And like I
don't think he can be an afterthought if Watson is out.
I'm saying he's going to be the clear number 2 behind Lazard, and I might as well just play Lazard.
Yeah, Lazard 62. That's lower than he has been previously, so that's a forgiving salary. I can see that for sure. I didn't realize he was 62. So, we didn't have our salary scroll on Monday. What was supposed to do?
I know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I did like the same Monday through Thursday process as I do to like get ready for a slate. I just feel so far behind because we didn't do the recap show.
Yeah.
And we didn't scroll through the salaries. It's like I look at a salary and I forget it now, but when we do the scroll, I seem to remember it.
Maybe we can change if we I want to get a handle on like Romeo Dobbs like jersey. Because like you just change a couple letters, it could go from Dobbs to Cobb. If we convince Aaron Rodgers that Romeo Dobbs is Randall Cobb, he's a better play.
Can we make him like 78 instead of 18?
Just think he's more likely to throw it to a tight to David Bakhtiari. He's back off an appendectomy.
If like instead of seeing an 18 for Randall Cobb, it's like 78. It's like
there's Cobb. There wouldn't be a 78 out in a route. Yeah, I think you're right. Probably should go Lazard.
Can you do? Oh wait, it's just skill position players who have more flexibility, not with their numbers now.
What?
Well, they changed their.
Could an offensive lineman wear like number 2?
Well, no, like
I want to see.
Well, that'd be sick, but I know there's more flexibility for like certain players. I thought maybe we could make a 78 work.
Maybe we could look into that. I don't think we can do 78 for them because they just report as eligible every play, but we can look into it at least. But I do think Lazard's probably the better play, which stinks because he's not high upside. Yeah, whatever. Anything else for you in this game? Any AJ Dillon? Anything like that or no?
I don't think so.
I agree. What are the odds it burns me? Probably not that high. But I do think that Cook is really fun. I do like Jefferson and receptive to Lazard/Dobbs if Watson can't go. If Watson does go, people probably won't be super high in him at 76. He was getting peppered before he got hurt in that Dolphins game. And I could see that being a fun game stack. It would require me to pass over McCaffrey, which stinks, but I'd be into that at least if we wind up getting the chance to use him. If he gets in a full practice by Friday, which he might not, but I think that he's intriguing there. Let's move now to the Broncos and the Chiefs. Mostly just talk about the Chiefs side. The Chiefs massive implied total at 28.5 for their game with the Broncos. Second highest in the slate behind Jared Goff's Detroit Lions. Love it. Total is 44.5. Chiefs are favored by 12.5. First time these two teams met, the Chiefs dropped 34 points. Jerick McKinnon went bananas. Jerry Jeudy scored thrice, but there was no Cortland Sutton in that game. Now, this one seems like there probably won't be Greg Dulcich, so you're still taking a guy out. How are you handling the Chiefs here, and will you bring it back with any Broncos?
I like Mahomes well enough. The harder part is figuring out the right stacking situation with him, or if I'm going to play him by himself. I like Juju Smith-Schuster more this year than I have in the past, but not really loving like the idea that he completely torches me for not being there. I love Jerick McKinnon as a player. Don't really want to chase this game against Denver from the earlier, just a couple weeks ago. Wow, it feels like 2 months ago, and that was still in December. So that's how recent that was. He's just scoring at such a high rate, yet the salary is still sub 7,000 for McKinnon. I don't think I'm gonna like prioritize Kelsey. Maybe I'm too low on the Chiefs, but the Chiefs are like true Chiefs again, where it's Kelsey is the clear preference, but then there's everyone else, and you don't know who it's going to be, if anyone.
Yeah, I was expecting to be fully off of Juju this week, but I opened the salaries and saw you 68. That makes it a little bit more acceptable. I'm not going to say intriguing because it's a step below intriguing. It's more acceptable. It's at 68 because I mean he's been fine since he came back from that concussion, but like hasn't really been fully like himself, I don't think. So that's why I'm not really super intrigued about that. Like, it's okay. I think my favorite Chief is Isaiah Pacheco at 63 because he's had a good baseline of yardage, and I think there's potential for that to expand. He's actually had double-digit receiving yards in 5 consecutive games, which is pretty nice. Like, they're getting him somewhat creative targets. I believe he had a downfield target last week as well. The route rate has remained fairly stagnant. He ran a route on 38% of dropbacks last week, which was, I think, his second highest, but still not a huge spike up from where he had been. So I don't think he's getting a role increase because I think they like McKinnon. But Pacheco did get a downfield target last week. I think with his salary down to 63 against a Broncos defense that just got torched by Cam Akers, I think that Pacheco is interesting. What do you think of him? Am I too high on him?
I don't think you're too high on him. I'd get there. I think I might be. This will sound weird because if there's a stack for a running back and a quarterback, you would go with Jerick McKinnon after what he did to Denver. But I wouldn't mind if I'm trying to play Mahomes to get Pacheco and get basically all of the rushing yards that they get, because Jerick doesn't really get a whole lot of rushing yards. I mean, here and there. And then if they put up a ton of points, just benefit that way.
Yeah.
So it does sound like you're higher on Pacheco than I am, but I still see the case for it. Any McKinnon for you?
No. Like a lot of his yardage came from like somewhat broken plays in both that game and the other game where he had a lot of yards. So I don't like he's shown more yardage upside than Pacheco, but I don't want to really think it's like duplicatable, if that's I don't know, whatever. I'm struggling with words today. I don't think I can bank on that happening again. So I think Pacheco is a better play in this game at 63. Now that the salary is down, given the matchup, given the way things set up, given the passing game involvement he's had more recently. So I'd rather go there for sure. I just wanted to get a check to make sure I wasn't too high, but the fact that you weren't like, no, you're way too high makes me feel better about him, which is good. I don't mind the idea of pairing with Mahomes either. I'm just like wishy-washy on Mahomes, I guess. I don't know. I shouldn't be because I liked Mahomes in the first matchup. But part of the reason I liked him in the first matchup was because I didn't think anybody would use him. And it was like, okay, if we're going to get Mahomes and Kelsey at lower roster rates, I should be very high on them. Not sure if that'll happen this week given the lack of like high upside quarterbacks. So I think he's fine. But I'm just not as, and he will be my number 2 quarterback definitively behind Fields, but it's not as, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was enthusiastic. On the Broncos side of things, taking Dulcich out, I do think makes me have interest in Cortland Sutton. I think people will probably go with Judy based off that 3 touchdown game, but in the games they played without Dulcich, a 5-game sample, Sutton had a 28% target share. He had 36% of the deep work and 32% inside the red zone. Those are really good numbers. And $6,800 facing off of the Chiefs. Probably not going to be a lot of attention there. Sutton did enough last week to make me think he's healthy enough to be playable. Where are you on Sutton and Judy? And then you can talk Latavius Murray if you hate yourself enough.
Hey, man, come on now. Sutton 7 targets last week with a catch rate over expectation of plus 19.4%, which he's very good at football whenever he's healthy, and I like to see a positive. Usually that means like, okay, well, he overperformed, but I think in this case I like it more as like he's able to make some plays
Right.
with his opportunity. A lot of air yards, good ADOT, team high ADOT last week of 16.3, 6 downfield targets. I like it. I guess my question to you is, how do you rank the 3 primary pass catchers in this game between Judy, Sutton, and Juju, all at mid-tier salaries, which usually we don't have any guys there.
It's pretty loaded this week. Yeah.
Yeah.
6,000 rated receiver is awesome. Probably the best it's been all year, I think, between Juju, Sutton. I think Christian Kirk's fun at 69. I like Drake London to my detriment at 67. DPJ is 65. Zay Jones is 63. Probably the best guy in that range, honestly. You got Jahan Dotson 61, Chark 6,000. It's loaded. Lockett too at 6,000. So I would say if we're talking tournaments where I am banking on a certain player being lower rostered, I'd rank Sutton first. Is that dumb?
No, I think it makes sense. He had a really good like underlying workload last week.
Yeah. Judy's salary is 7,000, which is very acceptable too. So I might put both of them above Juju. I don't know.
I think I would too, just because there's nowhere else to go for Denver. Yeah. There are a lot of other places to go for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay, let's move now to our trends discussion here for week number 17. You're going to start things off by looking at that Vegas versus San Francisco game. We are not talking Jarrett Stidham because nope. You're talking instead about the 49ers without Deebo Samuel. Now, a 2-game sample. What have you seen in those 2 games?
Yeah, Brock Purdy's been fun and like really, really efficient, even if you adjust for opponents faced. He's averaging just 24 attempts in these past 2 games, but 226 yards and 2 touchdowns for an EPA per dropback over expectations, like versus the defense. So 0 as you play exactly to expectation of plus 0.22 on a per play basis, which is awesome.
What was Garoppolo before he got hurt, out of curiosity?
They were, I did a similar trend last week and they were basically identical. So
why bother bringing back Jimmy Garoppolo if you have Brock Purdy on a 7th round rookie contract? I'm going to mute myself now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have him at the same number overall on the season. So, just basically like this has been a Jimmy Garoppolo-led offense. And so we don't need to downgrade this team. The only problem is the passing volume still low and Purdy getting a lot of help with some really athletic plays by one George Kittle, but that's within the range of outcomes for this offense. And now he's facing the Raiders in a really good spot. Vegas is 31st in adjusted pass defense, according to numberFire's metrics. And look, if you're turning things over to Jarrett Stidham, probably not that motivated to do things. And that is partially why the 49ers have a really high implied team total. This is not to say like I'm going to play Brock Purdy. It's he can manage, he can do enough in this offense to keep guys relevant, and everything starts with Christian McCaffrey. In these 2 games without Deebo, 83% snap rate, 83% route rate, which is just disgusting for a running back. 98 scrimmage yards and 30.5 adjusted opportunities per game. But we know that like last week was not the best spot, and he's getting that type of workload injected into a game against a team that's 26th in adjusted FanDuel points per target allowed to running backs and 21st on a per carry basis. They also allow the highest target per route rate to running backs and the highest yards per route run to running backs in the NFL. So that's awesome. Now we're talking about like narrow target trees too. Only 3 pass catchers have had at least a 50% route rate, excluding McCaffrey. That's Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Juwan Jennings, all at 86.5 or higher. Ayuk is up at 98%, Jennings down at 87%. But Kittle leads that sample in target share at 28%, Ayuk's at 23%, McCaffrey 21%, Jennings 17%, nobody else in double digits. So this team has just said, look, Brock, you're going to hand it off to Christian McCaffrey a lot, and when you throw it, it's going to Kittle, Ayuk, Jennings, or McCaffrey. It's been working. This is now in a very, very great spot against the Raiders. I do think that Kittle's salary of 74 is a bit tough. Ayuk, though, down to 66. I think that's honestly pretty solid because I think he's good enough to take advantage of his targets here. I don't know how much they'll need to throw. If I'm really feeling it, I think Juwan Jennings, there's been worse plays that I've recommended in my career doing this than Juwan Jennings at 55. I don't think I have to get there this week, though. But I don't see how you don't love Christian McCaffrey and make him a true priority play. So what are your thoughts on this 49ers offense overall?
Yeah, with McCaffrey, the only concern I have is the Eagles play at 1. If the Eagles win, they lock up the first round bye. So then the 49ers are fighting just for seeding. Like they could get the 2 seed, and that's an advantage because it'd mean they'd face the Vikings or potentially the Vikings in Santa Clara as opposed to Minnesota. So that would be a worthwhile motivation, but like I could see them cutting McCaffrey back to like a 70% snap rate, like still using him, but making him more limited and not like a full-on, like full McCaffrey in that situation. That's the only concern I have with him is that. If the Eagles lose, then like, it's all bets are off. But I think that's the only concern that I have there is do they scale him back if the Eagles win in the 1 p.m. block? Now that game doesn't finish until like 4 p.m. Eastern. This game starts at 4 p.m. Eastern. So maybe they make an adjustment in game, but that's my one concern with him. I still think he's a priority, but that's the one reason I can't gush about him. As far as Ayuk, I think Kittle's, like you said, a little bit high salaried. Ayuk, the target shares are good, but like with Stidham starting, they're not going to need to throw very much, and they haven't had to throw in the 2 Purdy starts. So the target shares are good, but in those games, Ayuk is at 5.5 targets per game. With the 2 without Debo, 5.5 targets per game, 0.5 deep targets per game, and no red zone targets per game. Like, I'd rather use Drake London. As like frustrated as we've been with his volume, he's right there at 67. Also has like a rush first offense, but he might have a higher target share than Ayuk will. I'd rather go to maybe DPJ at 65. So I'm out on Ayuk, I think. Probably not going to get to Kittle. So it's kind of just McCaffrey for me. Are you frozen?
Man.
Or are you mad at me?
I'm just London over Ayuk. I can see why you think that, but
Bet me.
I don't need to.
Bet me. What? What do you mean I don't need to? What? Of course you do.
I don't need to.
You never need to. 1-800-GAMBLER.net. You never, but like, I think you should bet me. If you actually think that Ayuk's better, bet me.
I think it's close.
I think London's better.
I know that. I think it's close.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a little bit lower on the 49ers. I do worry a bit about that.
Like how high are you on McCaffrey then? Not that high now?
I think he's either the number 1 or number 2 priority on the slate. I think.
Okay, just you made. Well,
I was laying out the only concern for him. That's the one concern that I have for him, and I think that concern might be enough where I'd put him below Jefferson as the number and make him the number 2 priority instead of number 1. Although honestly,
doesn't Philly lock up a win with or a first round bye with either win? Like they already know this.
No, they're. Right, but if they lose this week, then they need to win next week. If they lose this week, it opens up the door for both. Actually, Jefferson's the exact same spot as McCaffrey is, because if the Eagles win, then the Vikings also can't get a first round bye.
Right.
So that's weird. Okay. But I don't know, man. So I think they're more likely to rest McCaffrey though than they are Jefferson. Not rest him, but like scale back his snaps a bit.
Okay.
But he's still the number 1 or number 2 priority on the slate, but that's why he won't be 100% locked in for me. What?
Like the 2 studs we're going after, you have legitimate concerns.
It's not legitimate. It's like a 10% concern.
Okay.
Is what I would say. Part of the reason why it's not more than 10% concern is because the Eagles are banged up. Let's talk about them for my first trend and talk about the Eagles with Gardner Minshew in line to start his second game this week. This one is against the Saints. They rank 14th in my defensive power rankings. Not a not a matchup we have to avoid. And we can dig into Minshew's first start to see what to expect here. They had a 56.5% early down first half pass rate, which is fine. Their pass rate over expectation ultimately wound up at negative 8.2%. Thank you, Brandon, for looking that up because it was such a burden for you to pull that number for me. So they were more run heavy with Minshew than they were with Jalen Hurts, but they're also banged up. Lane Johnson, going to miss this game. He has always been a hyper impactful player, and that hurts this offense. So I think that takes Minshew out of play with his salary now up to 75. That's enough where I'm out on him. Pass catcher salaries are also pretty high. It's for a good reason because Minshew is chucking it downfield. 4 deep targets for Devontae Smith, 12 total targets. Both he and A.J. Brown went for 100-plus yards. A.J. Brown, 8 targets, 1 deep, 1 in the red zone. Dallas Goedert came off IR and had 2 deep targets, but just 3 total targets. Smith's salary is 78, fair but high. Brown, 84, fair but high. Goddard remains at 6,000. I have the most interest in Goddard, but all 3, at least considerations to me this week. I can't go beyond that, though. Miles Sanders, $6,800. If he and Lane Johnson were healthy, I'd go back to Sanders once again this week. If he misses, I do think Kenneth Gainwell will be very interesting at 54, given the rush-heavy approach. We know that Gainwell will get high leverage work because he already does, even with Sanders healthy. So I kind of thought going in I'd be higher on the Eagles than I am right now, but with the Lane Johnson injury, with the Saints being an okay defense, stuff like that, I'm a little bit wishy-washy. Where are you on the Eagles with the injuries piling up a bit?
Yeah. Saints games don't run a ton of plays combined, which is, in large part because of just how they play. Now, part of that is because they don't run a lot of plays themselves because they're not necessarily good enough to be on the field a ton, but this one could feel like it's a run out the clock situation where both teams are trying not to lose the game because this game does matter for the Saints. Obviously, we know what the stakes are for the Eagles, but it could be played pretty close to the vest. I'm not saying like the weather is concerning, but winds are currently projected around 8 miles an hour. Could be, a bit rainy. It just might not be like the most pristine game. I think with the salaries being what they are, I'm just a bit low on this entire situation. And I don't necessarily think when I look back, once the final buzzer goes off, which will be a little bit later this week on the main slate than usual, I don't think that not stacking Saints Eagles is something that I'm gonna regret.
Right.
So I think I'm okay just being low on this whole situation.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm at too, which again is surprising me because I thought going in I'd be high on, I want these wide receivers. I used Sanders last week and I thought I'd be back this week, but then he pops up in the injury report. AJ Brown limited on Wednesday. He'll play through his knee injury, but he's not fully healthy. That's a little bit concerning too. So Lane Johnson being out, a guy I respect a lot. So I think there's enough there where A, I'm lower on this offense, but B, also it opens the window maybe for the Saints to keep this first round bye discussion being viable.
AJ Brown at 84, Amon-Ra St. Brown 82, DeAndre Hopkins 81. Rank them.
Amon-Ra and then log out. I would go AJ Brown second, but
I think I'd probably go. Yeah, I'm not playing either of them anyway.
You can do an Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, Equinemius St. Brown stack, and feel good about that. Or no, feel good about aggressive. Anyway, go ahead.
If it was anyone other than DeAndre Hopkins, we would be all over this 10 target, 1 catch, 4-yard game.
If we're anyone other than, the Trace McSorley factor is relevant there.
No, I know, but
yeah, I know. It was fun. I thought I had fun watching it, honestly. Okay, let's go. The Bucs still won by 3. Let's go to your second trend. Top of the Texans defense because they're not quitting. They're still playing hard. And now they get the Jags this week. The Jags, I think it's worth noting, can make the playoffs without a win next week if things break right. If they win this week and lose next week, their playoff odds at 538 is still like 9%. So they have something to play for, whereas the Titans don't. So break down the Texans defense to me, because I think it's a relevant discussion, because the Jags, to me, very much worthy of rostering this week.
Yeah, so Houston's been scrapping, but they ain't been winning. And since week 12, they've played 3 strong offenses with Miami, Dallas, and Kansas City, and 2 bad offenses with Cleveland and Tennessee. But 4 of those teams put up 27 to 30 total points. The not so great Titans had just 14 last week. But the things are really interesting here with like their defensive numbers. If in terms of net expected points per play, which is numberFire's EPA model, Houston ranks. Just clicking in my notes. It just distracted me.
I put the cursor right in Houston, realized it, and clicked away immediately, but that was my
bad. Well, at least I didn't draw attention to it and ruin the show like a real pro.
We use a Google Doc for our notes in case you were curious, dear listener.
Houston is 6th best since week 12 in net expected points per play allowed, even before adjusting for opponents faced. And again, 3 of those are good offenses. My model, which does adjust, has them 5th over the past 5 games. Now they're 7th best in passing net expected points per play allowed, but still getting torched on the ground. They've allowed 148 rushing yards per game in that span, a top 6 rate. And against if we exclude the game against the Titans last week, which I think is probably fair to do, still allowing 264 passing yards per game, which is a top 10 rate. So like they're giving up yardage, and they're giving up points, but it might look and feel a little bit like they're playing better than they maybe are. Now they did hold Jacksonville to 6 points in their first matchup, as many of these games are this week.
When did that happen? What?
When
did that game happen?
Week 5, I think.
Our Jags scored 6 points?
If I'm not mistaken.
That's nuts. They did, you're right, but wow.
Yeah.
I do not remember that game at all.
I mean, it was 7 years ago at this point, but Trevor Lawrence's salary is $7,800. I don't think he's out of play, but I don't think he's a true priority. But with the rushing that Houston's allowed in this recent stretch where they're playing like quote unquote good, they're still getting given up a lot of rushing yards, and it's been a while since ETN has had a huge game. Now the salary is higher than I would like it at $7,700, but I think he's a really good play with his snap rate up above 70% in 4 games after he was limited back in week 12. Now on the full season, Christian Kirk leads the team with a 24% target share. Zay Jones is at 22%, Evan Ingram at 18%. Notably, Houston has allowed a league-high 21.5% target per route rate to tight ends. They've gotten completely tagged by any relevant tight ends they've faced. I'll have more on that later. Zay Jones at 63, Evan Ingram at 58, I think are really fun. I like ETN. I like Christian Kirk. I probably should like Trevor Lawrence if I like all those guys, but what are your thoughts on our Jags this week?
I do like Lawrence. That's the one shift I would make, is that I do think he's pretty interesting. They're playing indoors. We don't have a lot of high upside quarterbacks in the slate. He ran a lot last week, and like I said, they've got stuff on the line this week, so I think they actually will play pretty hard in this one. ETN not on the injury report this week, which is a good thing, which means that he's potentially a bit healthier from that foot injury than he was previously. He was not on it last week either, and in that game, a 70% snap rate, 22 carries and 3 targets. So really good workload last week for ETN. He was also not on it prior to week 15. So it's been a bit actually since he's been on the injury report, but I think that's all positive for him. He's had 112 and 127 yards in scrimmage the past 2 games. So I do like ETN quite a bit. Shocker in this game. I do think Lawrence in play, loves Zay Jones, like Evan Ingram a lot. No bringbacks at all, but I think the Jags are very, very fun in this game because I think people might be wary of them based on the narrative they need to win next week, which is true. But they can also get in potentially without that. And I think they care about that and know that based on what they said. The spread did lengthen from 4 to 4.5, which means people have been betting the Jags, which I think is intriguing as far as like confidence in using them for DFS. So I think they are one of the funner teams on the slate, and I want to be there.
I agree.
Okay. I was going to ask you about something. Forgot what it was though. Yeah, I can't remember. Oh, no, it wasn't. I wasn't going to ask you, but so ETN in that Texans game had 5 targets. He averaged 3 targets per game before James Robinson got phased out and traded, and he's at 2.4 since then. So he's actually gotten a worse passing game role since his role expanded, which is just delightful. But I still think he's fun once again this week. Let's move now to my second trend. Talk about Washington, because Carson Wentz back in the saddle for the Commanders this week. Comes in a pretty plushy spot as they're facing the Browns. It's a must-win game for the Commanders. So I wanted to dig in and see how we should shift expectations with Wentz being backed. At least earlier on this year, the Commanders were more pass heavy with Wentz than they were with Taylor Heineke. Their early down first half pass rate with Wentz is 54%. It is 40% with Heineke. Big gap there. They weren't efficient with Wentz. His NEP per dropback was negative 0.01. Heineke was negative 0.02. They could open up the passing volume a bit. I wouldn't be shocked though if they keep the same approach, given that it's been working decently well. It's coming at a time with Jahan Dotson starting to break out a little bit. In 3 games that Dotson snaps back up, he leads the team with a 24% target share. Just ahead of Terry McLaurin at 23%. McLaurin leads in deep targets 32% to 28%. Dotson has a 33% red zone share with McLaurin at 25%. So I think both these guys are viable, but McLaurin's salary is 74, whereas Dotson is 61. I think Dotson's really fun again. Just going to keep on running it back with him. The other guy who is interesting here is Brian Robinson, because Antonio Gibson mispracticed Wednesday with foot and knee injuries. He's had foot and knee injuries in the past as well. Seems like there's a legit shot he does not play. Even with Gibson playing quite a bit recently, Robinson has 100 plus yards in scrimmage in 3 of the past 4 games. The Browns are one of the worst rush defenses in football. So I think with all things considered, both Robinson and Dotson will wind up being high on my list, even with Wentz making his return this week. Any reservations for you around those two specifically with Wentz back as starter?
Dotson and Robinson?
Yeah.
No. This team had a late bye, which is something that you can factor in. I think for a rookie like Dotson, if you look at just the post-bye numbers, 25% target share, 90.5 yards with a touchdown per game, 15.1 yard ADOT, like involved in the red zone, downfield, in the end zone, really efficient. He's a good player. And so I think that he makes a lot of sense this week. For Robinson, like him as well, I think that he can he can run some routes. I don't know what exactly his true receiving upside will be this week. They did get him 3 targets. 1 target last week on 7 routes. So that's my one reservation with Robinson, but I do think that he can get there even if he's primarily a run-only player because the salary is what it is.
Yeah, I think the one situation which he is kaputty is if they fall behind early, which is possible because, they're not an amazing team. Because they used Jonathan Williams last week when they were down 2 scores after Gibson got hurt. That's one concern. So that there is a path to failure there for Robinson. But pretty good rushing workload. He's been better recently, like from a production perspective as well. Pretty bad rush defense. A lot on the line for Washington this week. So I do think he's pretty fun. He's like a priority for me. And I think he'd be a cash game play if Gibson sits. If Gibson plays, I would prefer not to be there in cash games and might wind up there anyway. And I'd still use him in tournaments. I'd just be a bit lower on him at that point. Where would you be on him if Gibson plays?
I wouldn't. I don't think I'd get there. I think I have enough options elsewhere.
Interesting. I think I'd still get there. I just have less than I would otherwise.
I mean, it's a really good rushing matchup.
Yeah.
I think I'd just restructure. Would you rather play Pacheco or Robinson with?
So I might use both in order to get Jefferson and McCaffrey
in the same lineup.
Yeah.
You think? Yeah.
So it might be a Porque no los dos situation, but yeah.
What about Zach Moss?
No. Let's talk about the weather for this week.
Seriously though,
no.
Ramondre with Damian Harris or Robinson, I guess,
Good
with
question.
and without Gibson to make that work.
Robinson 1 without Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ramondre 1 if there's no Harris.
Yeah.
Robinson 2 with no Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go Robinson with Gibson above Ramondre with Harris. That might be dumb, though. That might be dumb. Okay, weather for this week. There are 11-mile-per-hour winds in Foxborough for the Patriots and the Dolphins, 11-mile-per-hour winds for the Giants and the Colts in Jersey, and then 10-mile-per-hour winds in Philly for the Eagles and Saints. Nothing too concerning as of yet. Should be good to go. Relatively fun weather week for Week 17.
One more name to throw in, or two more names to throw in there. Kenneth Walker at 67.
Ooh.
And Tyler Algier, who had a season-high snap rate, had a lot of work last week. Seems like they might want to get him some work down the stretch.
Probably not going Algier, although he had 5 targets last week, which is good.
Yeah.
That was, I think,
5 of 8 running back targets, 18 of 29 running back carries.
The targets were interesting, but I won't get there. I would go.
Good matchup though.
What would you think about Kenneth Walker versus Robinson and Stevenson?
I think I'm a little bit lower on. I mean, Walker did get the 26 carries last week.
Yeah. Now at home, not facing the Chiefs. The Jets let up good amount of yardage to ETN last week. They're good defense, but
should we go Walker? I'd say Robinson without Gibson is better than Walker. Good.
That's 1. No, I'm sorry, I was counting. Yeah, well, that's 1.
Oh boy, this is too many names now. Are we doing like Ramondre with and without?
Let's just assume Harris is in.
Walker, then Ramondre, Algier. I think Algier is a better play than you do.
Probably.
But I don't think he's like amazing. I
think his odds of burning me are lower.
Like, would you play Cordero Patterson at 67? Like classic Cordero?
Like last year Cordero? Sure. But I don't think he's that.
I think he's getting close.
I don't know. Algier.
There's a lot of talking ourselves into stuff, though. And this is exactly when things can go poorly.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move to the positional plays here for Week 17. The players we don't have to talk ourselves into. Yep. Starting off at quarterback, what are you doing there?
Justin Fields. A lot of issues with quarterbacks overall, like at the top of the list. But Justin Fields getting the Lions indoors. Just one dome game this season, if my numbers are right, against the Vikings. Ran 8 times for 47 yards. But Detroit
has had only like one game without wind this year, much less in a dome. He had the Cowboys game was in a dome too. Well, it's retractable roof.
But. Yeah. Detroit, as I mentioned already, 30th or worse in rushing yards over expectation per carry, rushing success rate, and rushing EPA per carry allowed to quarterbacks. So
he was also in Atlanta. He's actually at 3.
Then my data was wrong, Jim.
Yeah, but Justin Fields on turf is cool.
Yeah, I don't. I'm playing him. Like, sorry, whatever. And my second love is Jared Goff. I think this
3 out of 10.
I think the salary is really good. Again, QB's kind of scarce with like in terms of the big hitters. This is by far the best game environment for a quarterback in my model. Very obvious stacking partners up against the 29th adjusted pass defense in football. He's been really sensitive with his matchups and with home road splits. And in 3 games at home against teams outside the top 20 in pass defense, 349 yards per game and 3 touchdowns with 0.39 passing net expected points per dropback over expectation. So pretty good.
Yeah. My number 1 is Fields too, because it's a high total, tight enough spread. I did bet the lines -5.5. So like Might not be as close, but Fields has run 15 and 7 times the past 2 weeks. He needs to go off to get the quarterback rushing yardage record, but he's playing indoors. There aren't a lot of high upside guys in the slate, and he is that, so I do like Fields. I have Trevor Lawrence number 2. I'd probably put Goff above him, though, thinking more about it, because it's a must-win game for Goff. He has a higher implied total. There is no chance he's limited due to resting for next week because they need a win this week. So I'm going to go Fields, then Mahomes, then Goff as my top 3. If I get to a 4th quarterback, that guy would be Lawrence. I think that's the way I'd phrase it. I'd put Lawrence above Cousins, is what I'm saying.
That's fine.
Okay. Moving to running back. What are you doing there?
Well, I love Christian McCaffrey, and even though Jim's trying to scare me, I still like McCaffrey a lot.
I'm scaring myself, man.
Matchup's really good. Production was down last week. The matchup this week is a lot better. Already noted a lot of this stuff in the trend section, but one thing I want to touch on again is that it's just a really good individual matchup with pass catching specifically. And I know that if you're leading, you don't have to throw as much, but he still was going to get his targets because he's got a 21% target share from Purdy over the past 2 games. And Vegas allows the highest target per route rate and yards per route rate to running backs. It's just a really good situation. And I think that even if we don't get full out Christian McCaffrey, sorry, Jim, but the floor is really, really high because of what he's going to do with even limited touches. My second love, and I guess I'm wavering on this a little bit, but I still feel good overall, is Travis Etienne. As I mentioned, Houston's still getting torched on the ground. He's got a really good implied team total, good overall game environment for this offense. He himself has been just okay since his return from injury, but consistently playing at least 70% of the snaps, has 74% of the red zone rushes, 53% route rate. I'm good with it for the salary. I want exposure to the Jaguars, and I'm going to have exposure to ETN. And then my third love is Brian Robinson, assuming Gibson sits. They're shifting back to Wentz, which probably an overall plus. I don't know if it can really be a downgrade from what they had, but he's averaged 18.1 carries and 1.3 targets per game without J.D. McKissick, which doesn't probably sound that relevant, but I think that he chipped away enough to be, something. And he's going to get a ton of early down work. And Cleveland is allowing 0.92 rushing yards over expectation per carry to running backs, which is 3rd worst in the NFL.
I have Robinson as my number 2 love, and I think the one pitch in favor of him, even if Gibson does play, is that Gibson is not fully healthy. And if he plays, he's playing hurt. And I think that could be a pitch for Robinson. And hypothetically, let's say Robinson plays half the snaps, which would be an increase for him. But he's done that twice this year. And in those games, 105.5 yards from scrimmage per game, 25 adjusted opportunities per game. Cleveland stinks against the rush. So I think that's why I could get there even if Gibson plays. But I understand the reservations. My first love, I prefer Christian McCaffrey. But I wanted to highlight Saquon Barkley quick because we haven't talked about him yet. And I think he's really good this week. He is at 29.6 carries plus 2x targets per game in his full games this year. And he's shown yardage upside recently. Now, I think that's intriguing because the Colts are good against the rush. But Barkley's past 2 games where he's kind of come back to life have come against the Vikings and Washington. Both those teams are phenomenal against the rush. And he had 9 targets per game in those 2 games. So I do think that Saquon is very intriguing. I would not be opposed to having a lineup where I go salary saving with Goff and Chark and then try to jam in both McCaffrey and Saquon. I wouldn't be able to get Jefferson there, but going with Saquon as my second stud instead of Jefferson, or going Saquon and Jefferson too, I think that works as well. So I want to make sure, even though Saquon is not in that top tier with them, half a step below it, and I want to make sure I have enough of him to benefit if he goes off once again. My third love after Robinson and Saquon is Isaiah Pacheco. His salary is down to $6,300. Denver got shredded by Cam Akers last week. They just fired their coach, so there can be a rally around the flag kind of effect with a fired coach, but they're not pushing super hard right now. Pacheco, 82 plus yards from scrimmage in 7 consecutive games. He's had double-digit receiving yards in 5 straight. I think with his salary down to 63, the concerns still valid, but less of a weight, an anchor on us. And I think that he has the building blocks for a very good game, despite the fact he has not shown that yet. So I think Pacheco at 63 is a good salary saver if I want to get to 2 of those 3 studs. Let's go to wide receiver. What you got there?
Amon-Ra St. Brown. Great matchup. Salaries trending down. By far the best game environment among receivers for the week. Over his past 9 games, he has not had lower than a single game target share of 25.7%. That's phenomenal. Chicago's allowing 1.96 yards per route run to receivers, which is second worst in football. And you can plug them in with Justin Fields or Jared Goff. So I'm going to have a lot of St. Brown this week. I do love the upper 6,000 range, but realistically, if I'm trying to prioritize Jefferson, McCaffrey, St. Brown, I'm going to be in the low 6,000 range a good bit too. And so for that reason, I love Zay Jones. Market share is nearly as good as Christian Kirk's on the full season, but in 5 post-bye games, he's actually had the better target share, 24.6%, 72 yards per game, 28% red zone share. I think the salary is a bit too low for this matchup. And then my third love is Tyler Lockett, assuming he's healthy to play. I know the matchup's not there, but he's good enough to beat this matchup at this low salary. If it was Tyler Lockett at 73, would have no interest, but Tyler Lockett at 6,000 can do a lot. 24% target share, 33% air yard share. I'm willing to roll the dice, but if I get, if I waiver on Lockett, I have Dotson, I have Chark right down there too. So, and I don't really see myself punting at receiver in the 5,000 range. I don't think it's the right week to be down there too often.
I tried to find guys down there and struggled. I think Dobbs at 59 is fine. But like below that, your most viable guys are probably like Richie James, maybe Rashid Shaheed, and that's not really what I want to be doing for this week. So I agree with you, where I'd rather live in the 6,000 range for the most part. And I can do that while still getting Justin Jefferson, who is my first level wide receiver. In the games he's played with Hawkinson, who's had a legit role for this team, even in those games specifically, Jefferson has a 31% overall target share, 43% deep, with 29% inside the red zone. He's had 24 FanDuel points in 8 out of 15 games, which is absurd. Again, he didn't score a touchdown in 3 of those games. Bananas. He's had 24 plus FanDuel points, 4 of his past 5 of his past 7. He had a $184 and 2 tuds against the Packers back in week 1. Probably means they'll be going out of the way to cover him. But I think with Hawkinson blowing up last week, it kind of makes it like, okay, you can't totally sell out just to stop Jefferson. I think that's a good thing for him. I do like Dalv as well in this game, but Jefferson is either 1 or 2 in terms of priorities on the slate for me. My number 2 love, I was going to go Drake London because I do think that he's very viable this week against the Cardinals. I am very okay with him. I will use him if I'm there. Go ahead.
Is it going to be Cortland Sutton?
No. I'm going to go to Dotson because I think that I agree with what you were saying about how like my roster construction is most likely going to lead me to having 2 guys in the low 6,000 range. So I'd rather highlight those 2 guys to fit more realistically what my build will be. So I do like London. If you got 67, you can get there, and you can get, I'm building a Goff, Saquon, McCaffrey lineup. You can get back to London for sure. But if you can't get there, Dotson the 61, I think is a good football player, as you said. He's been earning more targets. He's been getting downfield work. He's been getting red zone work. He honestly, I love DJ Chark. Should I prefer Dotson over Chark, given that Dotson's overall workload is better than Chark's?
I think so.
Okay. So I like Dotson. He'll be my second love. My third love is still Chark, because crazy efficiency. His salary is $6,000. Chark has 90 plus yards in 3 of his past 4 games, despite not having a great baseline workload. They are indoors, so it's the best game on the slate. He's got gobs of upside. So I think, to me, Dotson, Chark, Lockett is the best low 6,000 range we've had this entire year by a significant margin, and I want to take advantage of that. So again, we talked about Sutton, Juju, Judy, all those guys. Fine plays, but I think this range relative to salary is better. Let's move to tight end. What you doing there?
I have Evan Ingram. I like the idea of the Jaguars this week. He gets the Texans, against whom he had 69 yards on 10 targets in week 5. Houston is just one of the things I noticed. There's like always these anomalies throughout the year. They really haven't faced many tight ends who got volume. They've faced 7 tight ends with at least 6 targets. One of them was Kylan Granson, so I'm going to kind of filter that out. But the other 6, including Ingram, have all had at least 60 yards. They averaged 82 yards per game. It's just one of those spots where like they probably look better on paper if you look at like some sort of DVP or yards per game allowed to tight ends, but they just haven't faced anyone. And the ones who do get them do stuff on them.
And these aren't like all stud names either. Like you have the chart in our notes, and it has Logan Thomas, who hasn't done much at all this year, 65 yards on 6 targets. Gerald Everett, who had 61 yards and 6 targets. Like that, those Evan Ingram's got a better workload than both Everett and Thomas this year. So I love that.
Yeah. And like Kelsey, Goddard both went for 100, but like Dalton Schultz, who's kind of in between there, 87 yards on 10 targets. Like it's been a weird situation for Houston against tight ends this year. But I also have Cole Kmet at 53. I might have the most Cole Kmet at tight end just because of the salary and the game environment overall. But he's got a single game target share of 21% or better in 7 straight games. Hasn't gotten to 75 yards yet in a game this season, but it's a really good game environment. Detroit is the worst tight end defense in football by my adjusted fantasy points per target numbers.
And Kmet's salary is still just 53. Like that's super low for a guy who can do some stuff, great game environment. So I like Kmet too. One guy we have not discussed yet, and I think I will be in part as like a bring back for Robinson or Dotson teams. I like David Njoku. So in the games he's played with Deshaun Watson, he's at 6.7 targets per game, which for a tight end is very good. But it's hard to notice because they've played in such bad weather in 2 of those 3 games. He's at 2.7 red zone targets per game in that span, which is absurd. His salary is $5,600. So I think Njoku's a guy I will use as a bring back option decently often this week. Another option as a potential bring back is for my Saquon lineups, Jelani Woods. This is only if Kylan Granson sits. But in the 2 games without Granson, Woods has a 23% target share. He's had 98 and 43 yards. Absurd stuff. He ran a 4.6 40 despite being like 7'4" and being just a hulk of a man. And like honestly, if you're the Colts, nothing to play for, wouldn't you want to get a look to see if you're like cyborg tight end can play and be like a building block for you? I would. Okay. If Granson does play, I will bump off, go to Kmet, go to Njoku, go to Ingram, stuff like that. But if there's no Granson, I think Jelani Woods a great play. He's an actual needle mover for me at tight end for 47, or he has the potential to be that. And I think that is very intriguing. Let's go to defense. What's checking out there?
I got Washington. They're at home against Cleveland. Deshaun Watson's not good. Salaries down after some modest games. Top 10 in pressure rates, both offensive and defense, pass and rush. Defense overall, good against the downfield pass. I think it's just a good situation.
Yeah, I think that they work at $3,900. You can probably see Rosa in the right. She's right here. She was licking her paw, so I had to talk to her for a second. But Washington works. I think this whole range has a lot of like viable options. I like the Steelers only if it's Tyler Huntley, which I think it will be for this week. So defensive scoring, I typically don't look at because it can be so influenced by touchdowns. But they have had double-digit FanDuel points in 3 of 7 games since TJ Watt came back, and they've had no defensive touchdowns in those games. So you get a little Sunday Night Hammer back for the first time in a very long time. We haven't had that in a bit. $3,800. I think they grade out really well. Washington is on my list. Cleveland is on my list. Detroit is on my list. Green Bay, I would use. I think that all these defenses are viable in the mid 3,000 range. I would also say the Saints are not off my list at $3,200 against the Eagles with Lane Johnson being out. So I still respect the Eagles a lot, but I think that opens the door to make them a salary saver for me. So the high 3,000 range, mid 3,000 range, pretty good this week over on FanDuel. Brandon, any final thoughts for you before we close up shop for this week 17 preview show?
I think we covered all we needed to cover on a 13-game slate. Talked about some less fun games, talked about the most fun games, and after all this, I still feel really good with the Bears and Lions game.
Feel good about that. I feel good about the slate in general. Feel good about the fact that we have some like legit value plays we can trust and we can get to the studs without selling our souls. I'll take that every time. So should be a fun slate for sure. That is all that we have here for today on our week 17 preview show. We'll be back once again next week to break down week 18 and all the playoff implications there, letting you know how much it matters, stuff like that, which teams are carrying, et cetera, et cetera. It's always a fun show for sure. We'll be here throughout the playoffs too. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, people have questions for you on Twitter. Where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Goodula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sonas. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and good luck to you with your DFS lineups in Week 17. We'll talk to you once again next week to break down the final regular season slate of the year. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.